want the most pro-labor folks in Congress to recommend the most pro-labor folks to be the labor secretary. But that doesn't mean on a practical standpoint it's going to work out the best way we want it to.
Are you on? Which side are you on?
Marty Walsh is leaving the position of labor secretary for a cushy job as the head of the National Hockey League Players Association. Just bizarre. Absolutely bizarre. But that leaves open the job of the head labor law enforcer, and Lauren Kaori Gurley broke in the Washington Post that the White House is vetting top labor official Julie Su and the president of the country's largest flight attendants union, Sara Nelson, to lead the Department of Labor after Labor Secretary Marty Walsh steps down in March. 3 people familiar with the matter said on Friday. Leaders of the organized labor movement have also recommended the outgoing executive director of the National Football League's union, DeMaurice Smith, as a potential candidate to fill the position.
Wonder who those leaders are.
Yeah, so that's interesting.
I mean, I don't know a ton about DeMaurice Smith and the NFLPA, record that he has there. That is kind of, it's interesting, if nothing else, that you got the labor secretary heading off to the NHL Players Union while the former head of the NFL Players Union is a top candidate. That's interesting. But and I don't know a ton about Julie Su. I look forward to kind of digging into her record a little bit more.
Yeah, Julie Su was the head of the California Department of Labor, and by all accounts that I've seen, she was pretty good. She has been endorsed for the position by several unions.
I mean, Marty Walsh was as well, though.
Right.
Marty Walsh, there was, of course, critique and concerns from the left about Marty Walsh, but more or less, kind of the union establishment was pretty keen on him.
Yeah.
And
Noam Scheiber mentions, though, because that quote from the Washington Post that leaders of the organized labor movement have also recommended the outgoing executive director, Noam Scheiber, the labor reporter for the New York Times, said that, if you read between the lines here of the Washington Post piece about the short list, he says, does the established labor movement consider Sara Nelson to be too militant for the job? So that's an interesting, reading the tea leaves thing there, because I hadn't thought about that immediately when I read the piece, but I guess, you read the piece and there's a reason these things don't happen for no reason. People who leak have an agenda. Whenever you see something in the paper, whenever you see something in the news, sources say, those sources have an agenda. So why is it that leaders of the organized labor movement are recommending DeMaurice Smith, who is, maybe he's good, maybe he's not. I have but he's a nobody, right, on the national political scene. So why is it that they're throwing his name out there when there is Julie Su, who is well established, and also Sara Nelson, the president of a large union? That's strange. Senator Bernie Sanders also endorsed Nelson for the job, describing her in a recent letter to Biden as, quote, a leading voice for worker rights. And that kind of brings me to the discussion about this and some of my thoughts about it. And it's interesting seeing where people fall. And it seemed to me that the people who are politics first are really all about Sara Nelson as labor secretary. And the people who are more unions first are a bit more hesitant about it. And so I think that's an interesting kind of divide there, which is not to say that the people who are politics first are bad. I have good feelings for Bernie Sanders. I don't, he's good. But he's definitely a politics first guy. Even if he's like the best labor person in the Senate, he's still a politics first guy. Mehdi Hassan is another person that was like, oh, this would be really great for Biden, and in a stunning way. Yuleen New from New York, obsessed with Sara Nelson. Good choices, not even sure how others can come close. So and then you have other people who are definitely, I would consider them more labor first, like Harvey J. Kaye, saying, I love the talk of POTUS appointing my friend Sara Nelson as Secretary of Labor, but I think it would be a great waste of Democratic talent. We need Sara Nelson in the labor movement, not the cabinet. If anything, we should have elected her to AFL-CIO president. Tovarish, who is a union organizer and that's the name of her Twitter account, saying, becoming Secretary of Labor in 2023 is the definition of having access instead of power. I'd rather have Sara Nelson where she is, a role where she can help mobilize strikes that have the demonstrated power to force the hands of bosses and politicians.
I'm inclined to follow along those last two that you just read, Harvey and Tavares. Sorry, I can't pronounce that.
Tovarish, yeah.
Tovarish.
That's how I would pronounce it anyway. And Honda Wang, DSA Labor Committee, says much the same thing. Do you really want Sara Nelson's boss to be Joe Biden and have to carry out his weak agenda? Or would you rather her retain an independent, agitational voice with leverage over the Biden administration, or even lead the entire AFL-CIO at some point? Dave Jameson, labor reporter for the Huffington Post, says, hot take, there's actually not much Sara Nelson could do for the labor movement as labor secretary, aside from use the bully pulpit and maybe reform OLMS, the Office of Labor and Management Services. And and these are two people that are really, I think, labor first as opposed to being politics first.
Yeah, I'm inclined to believe, to agree with what Dave's saying, and that's with the caveat that we could do much better than what we've had. Right. Marty Walsh could have done so much more for the labor movement during his time as secretary were he so inclined, even if that would have been primarily through the bully pulpit. But that's not nothing, right? If Marty Walsh had come to Brookwood, Alabama, that would have been nice.
Right.
If anyone from their administration gave a damn and even mentioned the strike in Brookwood, Alabama, that would have been nice.
Right. Would
it have changed the stakes? I don't know. More than likely it wouldn't have. It's hard to say. But we'll never know because the administration never tried.
Right.
So I'm inclined to agree with Dave, and I second those comments from Honda Wang, Dave Jameson, Harvey J.K. I think that Sara Nelson could be a bigger asset outside the administration than inside of it. And I like what someone said about that's the definition of having access instead of power, because I do think that you get a real militant person in there. Well, take it from me, hell, as a militant person who tried the staff approach, let me just say, Sara Nelson would find herself very, very frustrated immediately, and hampered every step of the way. I would find it hard to believe that she would have much authority, much ability to really go out and do her own thing. Like, maybe I'm wrong, but, maybe, and one of the things that we'll probably never find out is, did Marty Walsh actually want to do more for the coal miners?
Right.
And he wasn't allowed to by his administration, or, just none of them give a shit. But, theoretically, someone like Sara Nelson, we would anticipate would care. She certainly has cared about the coal miner struggle. She
spoke here in Alabama.
Right. Yeah. I mean, she was there, one of the times that you and I reported on the rally, one of the rallies there. So, theoretically, I could see her using that bully pulpit, traveling to struggles across the country, and maybe that could be a boost. But I'm inclined to agree that she's better off staying out of that administration. And I do think, being the head of the AFL-CIO, that's different, and I think I would be supportive of that. I can't think of anyone else that would be, in serious contention for that position that I think would be a better fit. we'll see how things play out there. But I agree. Sara Nelson, I respect her leadership and I respect what she's done for the labor movement. I respect Bernie Sanders for his commendation of her and like recommendation of her. I mean, you know, I guess that's kind of what you want. You want the most pro-labor folks in Congress to recommend the most pro-labor folks to be the labor secretary. But that doesn't mean on a practical standpoint that it's going to work out the best way we want it to. So we'll see. If Julie Sue is a competent administrator and, you know,
willing to use the bully pulpit,
willing
I
to
would
do
hope.
like virtually anything,
Right.
it would be a step in the right direction compared to what we've had. Because I personally, you know, no disrespect to the folks out here who are big Marty Walsh fans, you know, but I was not impressed whatsoever. And frankly, I'm a little salty. He didn't even respond to any of my emails and letters.
Yeah.
Maybe that's me being petty, but damn, dude, you know, I don't think it's a lot to ask for government officials to respond to correspondence. And, you know, I wrote him multiple times about what was happening here in Alabama and didn't even get, you know, a form email.
Right. David Dayen, editor-in-chief of the American Prospect, throws another wrinkle into the consideration of Sara Nelson being labor secretary. He said, Sara Nelson is being vetted for a cabinet position. For what it's worth, the administration has a whole of government approach to fighting corporate concentration, and her union just endorsed the JetBlue Spirit merger, which is interesting. And then he links to a press release titled AFA-CWA adds full support to JetBlue Spirit Airlines merger after securing immediate improvements and protections post-merger. And in the statement, Sara Nelson is actually quoted saying, after securing improvements and protections for Spirit flight attendants in recent days, we are excited to announce our strong support for the JetBlue Spirit merger. Sara Nelson, president of the Association of Flight Attendants, CWA, representing 50,000 flight attendants at 19 airlines. Our union has experience with 8 mergers in the past 10 years. We agree with skeptics that consolidation has accrued extraordinary power to a few airlines. However, this merger will help to correct that. The JetBlue Spirit merger adds competition to the airline industry that creates more power for workers along with choice and comfort that benefits consumers. We urge regulators to work diligently to ensure the financial merger closing occurs in the near term so that flight attendants, other workers, and consumers can access the benefits of the merger as soon as possible. So that's, I don't know, maybe she's right, but that's not exactly the tone that you want to have in a administration that seeks to be more trust busty.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's posturing towards trust busting, and then there's actually doing it.
Yeah,
and so I'll say that, but also, you know, I think it's my understanding that CWA has taken a similar approach with the Microsoft Activision Blizzard merger. And I think the calculation is basically, yes, it's bad that Microsoft is expanding their monopoly, but this particular monopoly seems a little more willing to play ball with us and not be as viciously anti-union as their competitors. And so if we can, you know, sign off on this merger and get some concessions in exchange, maybe it's worth it for the greater good. You know, I'm like you. I can't say for certain whether or not that's the case. You know, I'm certainly
skeptical.
I'm skeptical. I also understand sometimes in the day-to-day grind, as unions, you have to try to make the best of the situation for your members right then and there. And, you know, maybe, I don't know, but maybe that means in certain cases dealing with the consequences of more corporate consolidation if it does, in fact, lessen the blow for your workers or even positively impact your worker members. So I get it. It's a complicated thing. I mean, at the end of the day, they're trying to make the best of these situations because there's so many layers to this problem. And the union, you know, individual unions representing their own bargaining units can't undo decades of consolidation, right? We, as individual unions, we alone are not going to be able to tackle the dominance of monopolies in this economy. So posturing aside, I don't see, a super aggressive approach from the Biden administration. I mean, they've made some positive, tracks, but all in all, this isn't going back to progressive era trust busting. So,
Yep.
yeah, I mean, there's a lot to think about there. And, there will be critiques folks will find of any of these folks that are put up. Feel free to send them to us. If you have thoughts about who should be the next labor secretary or, who should not be the next labor secretary. I know at one point there was someone from Pelosi World that some folks were pushing. That seems to have died down a little bit. But that's always a risk too. I mean, let's not forget, supposedly Hillary Clinton had Howard Schultz tapped to be her labor secretary.
Just having a boss as a labor secretary, that's just insane.
Well, I mean, it's like we talked about with Marty Walsh taking the NHL PA position, in large part due to his close connections with NHL owners. So I'm going to go represent the players while being buddy-buddy with their bosses who profit off their labor. Doesn't set well with me as a unionist. It just really doesn't. And so that's something I think is important for all union members to keep in mind is, what are the relationships of folks at the top? And, are they still with the rank and file?
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.